Good day, all. Thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Today, we're going to be studying out of Shankara's Crest Jewel of Discrimination. Really great book that ultimately kind of describes how Advaita Vedanta kind of works. Alright. So already you're maybe getting into some language that you're not so familiar with. So Vedanta, of course, is the studies that come after the Vedas that deal largely with, it's like kind of the philosophical or knowledge gaining part of the Vedas. Largely, it's all that knowledge is contained within the Upanishads. Anyway, so Vedanta, of course, is also a school of philosophical thought based off of those Vedas, right? There are six of them altogether. Vedanta is kind of one of the originators. Anyway, so Advaita, on the other hand, right? This is well, let's look at the translation, right? Advaita means non-dualism, right? It's the non-dualistic school of spirituality. So, and that essentially just means that we're not separate from God, right? We are essentially God, right? We are the divine, if you will. But and this is where the spiritual practice actually comes into play. We've forgotten, right? We have forgotten that we are divine, and Vedanta is one of the methods that we can take to once again realize, and I'm going to use that language, once again realize that we are in fact divine. Right? Because the spirit, the soul has not forgotten, but we've lost touch with the spirit and the soul, and therefore we've kind of forgotten that we are in fact divine. So Advaita, right, is non-dualism, right? We're not separate of it. All right. So like we think about dualism. Of course, there's monism, non-dualism, and dualism. In say Christianity, for instance, right, there is a God separate, right? Separate from us, right? So there is a clear separation between that. Although it's always interesting to ponder. I think it was like 3rd century, maybe 2nd century, very early on after the formation of Christianity, where there was a very strong debate. Is Christ the only one that could achieve this, Christhood, right? The state in which one becomes unified once again with God. And there was quite a debate. Personally, unfortunately, the side that won out is that we are separate. But take from it what you will. But again, the idea of non-dualism is that we are in fact divine, and we have forgotten, and we are looking to return to that divinity through, in this case, the practice of Vedanta. Okay, so so the things that I want to discuss today, though, one of the primary sources of our separation is delusion. Right? And of course, yeah, delusion is the source because the mind becomes kind of mixed up in believing that we are in fact separate, or the poisons. So maybe use that word, poisons of our environment and our mind itself have caused the mind to believe, kind of reinforce that separation. So these delusions, of course, prevent us from seeing and experiencing an absolute reality. And by absolute reality, I mean that in which we are divine. Now, it also prevents us from seeing reality as well, right? We're actively seeing it. As you know, I can't avoid politics. We see the impeachment process play on, and I'm going to get to that in a few moments. But we also see the kind of collective delusion that had taken place during the insurrection, right? And there are a number of factors Do I believe that our ex-president, that our former president, is responsible? Absolutely. Do I also believe that because of one's inability to think clearly and not succumb to one's own delusion had a role in kind of taking up arms in some cases, and truly kind of succumbing to the vitriol of our former president? Um, then yes, there is a delusion on both sides, one influencing the other, as well as the intensity of delusion that one experiences in their lives that has caused them to reach such a heightened state of emotion. Okay. Okay. So the mind, which has succumbed to delusion, also has a great inability to use the tool of reasoning in a way that is established in reality. All right. Okay. So, um, and this is like we're kind of getting to the kind of like the heart of like what's going on. By the way, I'm just reading from some of my notes. I haven't actually gotten to the reading that I want to get to today. So just so you know. Um, so so that's the thing, right? With delusion, because it becomes an augmentation of reality. I always want students to consider kind of lower reality, which we see and feel and we directly experience through the organs of perception. And then there's that higher reality. That higher reality, of course, is the divine. That is the highest of goals, if you will, the practice of yoga and Taoism, Buddhism, Christianity for some, as well as many other religions and spiritual schools. That higher reality is the one that we're trying to achieve, but there's also wonderful effects that happen in this lower reality that helps us see more clearly. All right. And there's a lot of tools, a lot of things that we must practice to fully embrace this reality. Okay, so reasoning so important. This of course this is a cause of great frustration on the part of those who've worked diligently to find clarity and yet get bogged down by those on their team whose delusion has hijacked their reason and has thus stifled progress. So when we think about interacting with others, all right, and who again, if you're following along with the impeachment, you might again, I will kind of talk to this in slightly greater detail later on, but it can be really frustrating for those who see the reality of how things have like unfolded, right? And see the cause, the responsibilities that are not being met. So it can be very frustrating, but we got to remember the rule of karma here, right? We can only affect our own behavior. We cannot affect the behaviors of others, and it's usually in our best interest to lead by example. All right, so the if frustration arises in your own mind, it is because you're trying to exact your will over another person. It's there's no fruit to that. Let's just say, okay, there's nothing that's going to come to that. So anyway, so what is delusion, right? So let's look at the definition of delusion. An idiosyncratic belief or impression that is firmly maintained despite being contradicted by what a symptom of even a mental disorder, which, for those of us who work very hard on seeing what's in front of us, realizing it, even if it doesn't really fit whether it's our worldview or may lead to short-term suffering on our part, then we're trying to see as clearly as possible, but we have to take into consideration that there is the kind of collective delusional disorder that might be going on here in our in our society today, and that's something that also needs to be addressed. So the source of that potential mental disorder, what is the cause of it? what's the source of it? Of course, may not be clear, but right, as people who practice yoga, right, or these arts that are hopefully healing, that we also must be very mindful of the fact that others may be suffering on a level that we simply cannot understand. Okay. Okay. So the source of our delusion is manifold, right? And this is we've got our entire environment around us constantly influencing us. So I'm wearing my hoodie, right? It's cold out, right? Karma, right? Cause and effect, right? There's something in my environment that is causing me to want to bundle up, right? It's cold out, I want to bundle up. Summertime, the opposite is true. I want to wear as little layers as possible. This also happens with the relationships that we have in our world, as well as our um, our current mental condition, right? Based off of the, as Adi Shankara will bring up in the reading, right? The births that have kind of taken place over time, right? Whether you want to think about the idea of reincarnation literally or figuratively, that is up to you, right? But these births, uh, whether it's day by day, moment by moment, we are mentally constantly consuming those things that are happening around us, and they are influencing our current as well as future karmas or actions. Okay. Um, yes. Also, it should be noted that the degree in which the mind has been influenced by delusion varies, all right, based on any number of factors as well as their intensity. And again, I'll use this anecdote from the impeachment to kind of drive this point home. Okay, here we go. So, right, the example, of course, with the impeachment trial, there are those who will not vote to impeach, despite the obvious wrongdoing, because the senator or senators would likely be voted out of office. Right? This happens with those who will vote to impeach as well. It should be noted, right? So those it's not just a right and left thing, right? What if? And I'm not sure if there is. Nobody has signaled that this is the case, and this might not be the best environment for us to discuss those on the left, but certainly it happens. It might come up in like future bills. I'm sure Joe Manchin with the American Recovery Plan, right, that has been put forth, the nearly $2 trillion bill that's been put forth. Joe Manchin from West Virginia, he's like weighing his options. So shoot, what do we do here? It's got to be very difficult for that person, and I really do hope that he makes the right decision based truly on what is the most virtuous, right? And that's really what it's going to come down to. So whether it's Joe Manchin with the American Recovery Plan, he might be wanting to keep his job, but he might realize that the virtuous thing to do is to help the American people. So short-term suffering, right, for ultimately what is good, right? The long-term, right? Short-term suffering might mean he gets voted out of office, right? And the same thing can be said for, I don't know, who's Senator Lee, I think, for instance, or Romney, right? Romney, I'm a big fan of. Don't agree entirely with a lot of his policies, but his heart is good, man. He is, his heart is good, it's genuine. He's working very hard on, again, doing the virtuous thing, even though it might end up being, right, he might vote for impeachment again, right, because he voted for impeachment last year. He might vote for impeachment again, even though I think he's up in 2024 for re-election. It might mean that he does not get reelected. But it's weighing the right thing, right, with potential suffering. Right? And we go through this like every day, by the way, right? We weigh these things out all the time, right? Working on projects, in family relationships, wanting to do the right thing, but also realizing that there might be some consequences to doing that right thing. Okay, so again, this happens on both the left and the right. Now, are there those senators who believe that the former president should be impeached, but will still vote not to impeach because said senator wants to maintain position of power? After all, power corrupts. Then there are those senators who've been fully consumed by the big lie, right, and believe it wholeheartedly. All right, so this Patanjali puts it right in Sutra 2.4, where you have these different levels of intensity. Right, there is the absolute intensity. What is it? Um, the very strong pull of the kleshas of the corruptions of the mind, of which delusion or misapprehension is one. Um, in which case we don't even see it; we're unaware of it, and we constantly act based on that condition because we have an inability to see our own flaws. And then we become aware of it, and it starts to become in that awareness, right? We have the ability to kind of work with it, and there are certain tools that we might use to overcome that klesha, that coloring, and in this case, delusion. Finally, or not finally, but we go to the next level of weakening it still. Right? So we're not so influenced. Our conditions, we've changed our habits. Our conditions, our conditioning has changed to the point where we no longer act based off of self-interest, but maybe in collective interest. And I think that is maybe the best way to frame it in the context of this anecdote. And then finally, it goes to a seed stage. So in Patanjali's yoga, it never fully disappears. There's always the potential for it to rise back up. So, whether it's Vedanta or yoga, Patanjali's yoga in this case, we've always got to be, kind of very flexible, right? Our footing has to be strong. All right. So what is it that makes the mind so susceptible to delusion? So ego is a great start, right? This is a great place to begin. But there's plenty more external influences as well as internal mental influences that will determine one's ability to discern reality from delusion. All right, so here we are. I've decided to do plenty of writing this week. So I want to read. All right, so again, this is from Shankara's Crest Discrimination. So this is the section of the discussion between a student and a teacher. And this is the section is called The Covering of Intellect. The discriminating faculty, with its powers of intelligence, together with the organs of perception, is known as the covering of intellect. To be the doer is its distinguishing characteristic. It is the cause of man's birth, death, and rebirth. So this covering of intellect, it's very interesting. Some of the language here, it might be a little bit difficult to, kind of keep up with, but I'll do my best to explain. Okay, so it goes on. The power of intelligence that is in the covering of intellect is a reflection of the Atman. All right, so the Atman is that spirit, if you will, that higher reality that we're ultimately trying to achieve. See, the Atman means like the true self, right? This is the part of our being that is, it is peace, right? It is calmness, it is steadiness, it is purity, clarity. Okay, so this is the Atman. Right? And so this covering of intelligence, as he will frame later on, and again, I'll use the Yoga Sutra to kind of just points home, there is something that is covering this intellect. Right. Well, we should note that the intellect itself, right, the human mind's intellect is separate of the Atman. Okay? Right. So the Atman is this higher reality. The intellect remains in this lower reality, but in some ways is a bridge to it. In some ways, right? The Dantons out there, don't jump on me about that, okay? Okay, the power of intelligence that is in the covering of intellect is a reflection of the Atman, the pure consciousness. The covering of intellect is an effect of Maya, right? Maya is the illusion that we see around us. Now, it's not an illusion, it is reality, but it's this lower reality. And therefore, in Vedanta, we call it an illusion because it keeps us from realizing, once again, the divine. All right, so the organs of perception, along with the ego and the intellect, consumes all those things around us, right? Our environment around us. And it keeps reinforcing the anchor that is this lower reality. It possesses the faculty of knowing and acting. It always identifies itself entirely with the body and sense organs. It has no beginning. It is characterized by its sense of ego. So again, this is like what I was talking about earlier about ego, right? And its ability to influence clarity, right? In our this higher intelligence that we're trying to achieve. Right? It constitutes the individual man or woman. It is the initiator of all actions and undertaking. So again, our karma, right? Trying to understand this rule or idea of like how karma works. And a lot of times it's seen like the cycle of karma. We have a tendency to repeat things from our past, even though those things may cause great suffering, either to ourselves or others. But this is the source of our actions. Okay. Impelled by the tendencies and impressions formed in previous births, it performs virtuous or sinful actions and experiences their results. Right? So impressions is the key word here, right? Samskaras, these impressions are experiences that we've had in the past that are going to largely influence how we act in the future. Right? So using it's winter, it's cold out, I'm going to cover up. All right. This person's being a jerk. I'm going to react by also being a jerk. And that is, of course, not a good course to take, by the way, even though it seems so satisfying. A lot of times we've got to approach things with as level head as possible, even if we're under great pressure or we are, someone might be kind of attacking us in a way that is really distasteful. Keeping a level head is one of the best approaches we can take at the end of the day. All right, may not seem that way in the moment. Continuing the next paragraph, it gathers experiences by wandering through many wombs of higher or lower degree. The states of waking and dreaming belong to the covering of the intellect. It experiences joy and sorrow. All right, so of waking and dreaming. So this is an important note. This comes from the Mundaka Upanishad, and essentially these four modes. So we have the wakeful state, we have the dreaming state, the deep sleep state, and then we have the fourth Turiya, as it's called in Mundaka Upanishad. And essentially these first three states, and specifically the two that Shankara is giving us here, are part of that lower reality, right? They're always going to be operating that lower reality, okay? So that's what this covering is of the intellect is keeping us in these first few states, this lower reality. Because of the sense of I and mine, it constantly identifies itself with the body and the physical states and with the duties pertaining to the different stages and orders of life. This covering of intellect shines with a bright light because of its proximity to the shining Atman. So this is interesting. So we have this the covering of intellect. Ideally, at the core of our being, we have the Atman, right? This higher consciousness, right? The true self. And we have things like the intellect itself, the ego, right? Our environment, the qualities of nature, constantly covering up the Atman. Now, the Atman, just as Patanjali puts it, and Shankara is putting it here, right? There's a brilliance to it, a radiance to it, and we cover it up. And the more we cover it, the dimmer that light gets. The more crap we take off of it, right? The less influenced by our environment, the stuff that we take off of it, the more radiance, right? The brighter it shines. And ideally, that's what we're trying to get to. Okay. Because of its sense of I and mine, it constantly identifies itself with the body and the physical states and with the duties pertaining to the different stages and orders of life. This covering of intellect shines with a bright light because of its proximity to the shining Atman. It is a garment of the Atman, but man identifies himself or herself with it and wanders around the circle of birth, death, and rebirth because of his or her delusion. The Atman, which is pure consciousness, is the light that shines in the shrine of the heart, the center of all vital force. It is immutable, but it becomes the doer and experiencer when it is mistakenly identified with a covering of intellect. Right? So if we want to think about things going back to like the impeachment, right? Doing the virtuous thing or doing the thing that's going to provide, that's going to keep our job, right? It's a difficult thing to weigh, for sure. Okay, the Atman assumes the limitations of the covering of intellect. Because it is mistakenly identified with that covering, which is totally different from itself. This man or woman who is the Atman, again, the pure being, right? The higher consciousness, regards him or herself as being separate from it and from Brahman, who is the one Atman in all creatures. An ignorant man or woman, likewise, may regard a jar as being different from the clay of which it was made. Right? But the clay remains, remember. Okay. By its nature, the Atman is forever unchanging and perfect. But it assumes the character and nature of its coverings because it is mistakenly identified with them. Although fire is formless, it will assume the form of red hot iron. Okay, so maybe leaving you with this because it is very late. And I suppose pranayama is not in, well, we'll take a few deep breaths. But anyway, by its nature, the Atman is forever unchanging and perfect. See, and I can't stress enough that you're perfect, all right? You're amazing. And this is what I love about yoga, Vedanta. You've just forgotten, right? You're an awesome person, right? And you've just forgotten. And Vedanta, the practice of yoga, the only thing we're really trying to do is remember that. Okay, let's sit up nice and tall. Close your eyes. 3 deep breaths. Let's move to an exhale. Deep inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. And exhale. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and listening. Really appreciate it. Just remember, you're amazing. Peace.